Thank you so much for joining our session. Just giving it a couple minutes while everybody comes in from the waiting room. And just while we wait for everybody to come in, please do use the chat to introduce yourself, talk about where you're dialing in from. And also, we are halfway through not just our regional day, but halfway through our first inaugural B Corp Global Climate Summit. So yeah, please do kind of share any thoughts or any inspiration that stood out to you over these days so far. Some logistical things, please keep your microphone on mute throughout the session, but do use the chat. We have a full panel here, so we hope to be able to get to some of the questions, but please do use the chat to interact with us throughout the session. And yeah, I mean, there's been some incredible sessions so far throughout this summit. And I think before we begin, I just wanted to give a huge thank you to all of the organizers that have made these 3 days possible. It was a very ambitious event, and there's a lot that's happened behind the scenes. And also to all of the speakers who have been a part of all of our sessions and our broader network who have joined us here today in a time of, Zoom fatigue and making all this time to join these different sessions. So thank you to everybody. We're here to talk about communications, and there's no shortage of communications around the climate crisis and also around climate action today. There's also a lot of challenges and a lot of pitfalls. During one of the panels this morning, they talked about kind of the controversies in talking about net zero and how to avoid greenwashing. So there's so much to unpack when it comes to communications in this space. And this session in specific is focused on effective climate communications. And actually, when we were having an initial briefing session, Merick, one of the panelists here today, reminded me of a quote from Sir David Attenborough, talking about how saving our planet is a communication challenge. And I think that's a really good way to set the stage and a powerful statement to reflect on as we have this conversation. So I'm really excited to share the virtual stage with these incredible humans here today. We have some experts from creative agencies and consultancies, as well as business leaders from a range of different industries and of businesses of different sizes. So they'll each share their own experience today and also kind of highlight specific campaigns or initiatives that they've worked on. So thank you, first off, to all of you for joining me today, and a special thank you to Lucy, who is joining us from New Zealand, where it's 1 a.m. So I think everybody just give her a bit of a virtual round of applause for being here and joining us. So without further ado, I think I'll first take the opportunity to introduce each of our panelists individually, and then we'll open up the forum to a more dynamic discussion. So I think first starting out with Philippe, I'd love to introduce Philippe Schuler, who's the Global Impact Manager at Too Good To Go. So when we think about climate action and tackling the climate crisis, reducing food waste is one of the key things that we could do to reverse global warming. And Too Good To Go is actually the #1 app for fighting food waste, but that's not all that they do. So Philippe's here to talk a bit more about that. And also, I think as you introduce yourself, I'd love to hear, Too Good To Go has been incredibly successful in raising over 31 million to tackle this issue, but you've also deployed global campaigns to change consumer behavior. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the nuances between communicating about climate with each of these different audiences.
Of course, thank you very much, Maria, for first of all, the invitation, but also for the nice introduction. Really nice to meet you all. So yeah, as mentioned, I'm Philippe. I'm part of Too Good To Go. And what Too Good To Go does is practically building a movement against food waste. And we plan to do so by being, of course, an app, a marketplace that allows surplus food from going to waste, from food services, restaurants, supermarkets, etc., and propose and give them available to consumers at a reduced price. But ultimately, as you are well aware, probably, I hope most of you, is that food waste is a massive issue. And that means it's also a systemic issue that transcends across all segments of society. And that means that each and every one of us, whether it's individual, businesses, investors, politicians, all have their role to play when it comes to tackling this issue. And of course, for us, when we as Too Good To Go, when we are trying to build our global campaigns and also communicating about the issue, it all comes down to also tailoring these different messages and these different call to actions to all those different audiences. When you're looking at, for example, when you're looking at investors, it's all about, how can we drive impact at scale together with them, and how can they take responsibility as well in investing into businesses that are willing to drive this change, that really have this purpose, but also looking to make profit at the same time. So really having this at the same time, looking forward. While consumers, I think, is really the most essential part of all, because individually, this is where we have the biggest amount of food being wasted. So in households, by far the biggest majority of food being wasted is in households. So it really comes down to how we as individuals can drive action and how we can change our daily behaviors on a daily basis. And we do campaigns left and right to do so. So communication is a big factor for us. Recent campaign, for example, that I can give you an example of is date labeling. So some of you might know, that there's different expiry dates on products. The problem is that a lot of people don't know the difference between them. They misunderstand them, they misinterpret them. So for us, it was extremely crucial to find a way of how we can better communicate those differences to consumers and also make them aware of the different actions that they can take to use their senses to look, smell, and taste the product before even wasting it. So really making it extremely simple for them to understand it, but most importantly, also to make it very relatable for them to take a simple action on a daily basis. And I think that is pretty much the core within Too Good To Go, is trying to inspire and empower people as much as possible, but also making it as simple as possible to take a daily action against food waste.
Thank you so much, Philip. And I loved seeing that most recent campaign across Europe and likely across the world. And I think that's also such a key theme that we'll probably touch on a bit today, of how do you make some of these concepts relatable and bring it closer to home. And so with that, I want to jump from, one issue in tackling food waste to another massive issue, which is challenging the waste generated in the fashion industry. So jeans are one of the most polluting items in fashion, but our next panelist, Bert van Saun, who's the founder and CEO of Mud Jeans, decided to do things a bit differently. And one of the things that I'm a huge fan of Mud Jeans is that circular denim's a whole part of your communications positioning. It's not just something that's data that's left for your sustainability report. So Bert, I'd love to hear from you of why has it been so important to incorporate that messaging in everything that you do, rather than it being kind of an afterthought?
Yeah, that's a good question. We are Mud Jeans, the first and only circular denim company in the world, and we started 10 years ago by making jeans in a proper way without using people as slaves and not using horrible chemicals. So that's easier said than done, but that's done. And then the journey doesn't stop there. We feel we also have to be responsible for what we put into the market. Today, there's even a name for it, extended producer responsibility, but 10 years ago, that didn't exist yet. So we would like to have our old jeans back. To be able to use the raw material again, and that is possible. So today we have two ways of getting them back. First by deposit, so you get 10 euros discount, which also is not special, but it's a way of getting your old jeans back. And then there's the leasing system we have, where you pay 10 euros a month for 12 months, and then we hope that you keep them for a long time also. But you can change them, and that we call it slow fashion. It's the opposite of fast fashion. And fast fashion has created a lot of trouble for us. The fashion industry is one of the biggest polluters. It accounts for 10% of all CO2 emission. And as we speak, every second, somewhere in the world, a full truckload of clothing is being trashed. So it's a serious thing, and we all have to be aware of that. I've been in the garment industry now for 40 years nearly, and I've seen it grown from something, where you make goods to look good and to protect yourself, to this fast fashion monster where we live in a throwaway world where you wear your t-shirt once and then it's gone. And that's really horrible. We want to change that, and we do it dramatically well. We are one of the highest scorers B Corpses in the world. And but that's not the thing, the thing is, how do you market this? How do we tell the story? How do we get people wearing better jeans? And that's very difficult, but we call it positive activism. We want to send a positive message saying it does exist. You can wear a pair of jeans that's properly made, not too far away, not by using horrible indigo, for instance. Every day we try to make a next step and to do it better. And it's very interesting because once you start this kind of thing, you get into this whole new world of possibilities. I mean, everything is there. We can do the bleaching now with ozone. We can use laser to make to give it this worn out look. There's so many solutions. We just have to use them. And that's very hopeful. And we want to grow. Of course, growth is also kind of a word that there's a sidekick on that, but we want to grow because we want to make more impact. And we also want to be this company, this tiny little company, shaking up the industry, saying, guys, come on, we are doing it. Copy us. We have the sustainability report. Everything is there. You can find every detail, how we do it, why we do it, and start doing it. So that's part of our mission also. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Bert. And I think, we'll definitely touch on the challenge with growth and how you kind of balance that when talking about climate action. But yeah, I think one thing that you talked about, which is a great segue to our next panelist, is, it's amazing to hear from businesses that are making a really positive impact, but not everybody knows how to talk about the positive impact that they're doing out in the world in the most effective way. So with that, I'd love to introduce Lucy von Sturmer, again, who's awake and joining us, and thank you so much, who founded the Humblebrag consultancy and also initiated Creatives for Climate, which was born out of a summit held at the Patagonia offices. So Lucy, you've helped companies communicate their positive impact out in the world, but you've also brought together creatives around campaigns that, amongst other things, have helped shape policy. So I'd love to hear from you as you introduce yourself and talk a bit about your journey of why do you think increasingly communications around climate needs to evolve from individual action also to kind of build into collective action?
Great question, and super exciting to be here. Long story short, my background is working in civil society, so I kind of grew up working for organizations that were mandated with being agitators. And then I kind of hit my communications limit within that, where I realized I ended up in a multi-stakeholder initiative in fashion, actually, which is really interesting because you have brands like Nike and Adidas sitting at the table with civil society and government. And for a mid-20s activist as I was, I felt like change was too slow. I was way too idealistic. If this table wasn't going fast enough, I wanted off the table. And so I thought, screw this, I'm going to work in advertising because at least I'll have a clear idea of where my personal purpose can lie. And I only lasted 6 months in advertising where, my sense of moral obligation kind of crept up. And at the time I was writing for publications like the Huffington Post and Sustainable Brands and Adweek, and I was like, I need to get my voice out. And I was seeing the Emmanuel Fabers of the world, or the Rose Massarios, and I thought, there's a lot of humdrum CEOs of companies, like we need CEO activists. So that was really the proposition of the Humblebrag. My biggest weakness is also my biggest skill, which is being outspoken. And so I packaged that as a thought leadership agency, helping companies and brands be more visible as agenda setters. But as anyone here will know, this mission is really personal. So you kind of also, when you're at the forefront of things, you do tend to hit limits where you go, oh, I really believed in this, but maybe now I'm starting to recognize that in my case, working within the system was too slow. So 2 years ago, I came across Extinction Rebellion during Cannes, and I ran up to one of the activists that had actually been part of writing the handbook, This Is Not a Drill. And I was like, oh my God, I have this business. It's about business for good. It's amazing. And he was like, no, like you are part of the problem. You've got too much to gain from this. And so it started this really interesting process of introspection where I was like, am I part of the problem? Am I part of the solution? And so, the advertising industry in the UK responded and was really quick to take action. And in the Netherlands, I didn't see that happening at all. So we created this summit where we basically invited Extinction Rebellion to come and talk about the science, to create a real sense of urgency, because I was seeing a lot of kind of new players in the marketing space jump into conversations around sustainability, where they were, selling the change. And I think that any practitioner in this space needs to hold themselves accountable to future generations. And that's what it is. That's why greenwashing is so dangerous, because, you are robbing future generations of their livelihoods on this planet. So that mobilized a community of creatives that wanted to respond to briefs. And somehow I've kept that going for 2.5 years as a collective. We have, responded to briefs from activist organizations that have led to policy change. In the Netherlands, Fossil Free Nederland, we're able to ban fossil fuel advertising in Amsterdam, and in New Zealand, we supported a grassroots initiative called For the Love of Bees, ban glyphosate from the streets. So that's probably all you need to know. But answering your question, Maria, moving from individual to collective action, I think that, some of us are trying to occupy both spaces, and there's really no business case for collective action at this point. So, yeah.
That's an interesting one of like, what do businesses have to gain from engaging in collective action? I think it's a challenging one. We know it needs to happen. And I think so much of what we're talking about throughout this summit is about collective action, because we can't do this alone. But yeah, I think there's still some, I guess, communications that needs to be done to kind of persuade people along on that journey. And since we're on the topic of communication specifically, and you talked about your experience at creative agencies, it's also a great segue to introduce Tom Tapper, who's the co-founder of London-based creative agency Nice and Serious. You do amazing work and also pride themselves in making not just good creative work, but creative work that the world needs, and work on a range of clients, like ranging from the Rainforest Alliance to Innocent, who we heard from earlier today, and many of these clients that are inherently kind of doing something good for the world. So Tom, I'd love to, as you introduce yourself, talk about the role of business as a sector in dedicating their marketing dollars to accelerating climate action, and not just, using it as a marketing tactic. I'd love to hear your opinion on that. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for the introduction. So hi everyone, I'm Tom. I set up the agency Nice and Serious about 13 years ago. I was originally an environmental scientist, and I was just really, really frustrated at how badly environmental and social issues were being communicated by charities and by brands at that point in time. And I am a huge believer in the power of creativity, of ideas, of stories, of narratives in order to create change. And I wanted to try and create a business that would use the skills that advertising agencies use, but try and direct them to create behavior change for charities and for businesses that are committed to do good. So that's what I set up the agency many years ago to do, and that's what we've exclusively been doing as an agency since then. And I mean, to your point, I think brands, organizations, if you are interacting or if you are selling or communicating to a customer, that is an incredible communications channel for you to activate and for you to use your voice to influence your customers to create positive change. So I think brands now, if you have made a meaningful commitment, and if you have started on that journey to get to net zero in terms of your impact as an organization, I think you have a responsibility to try and activate your citizens, the people you interact with, to create change. And I think, I know there are some big, horrible businesses out there that have given a lot of us a bad reputation and have scared people because of the fear of greenwashing. But I think if you're an organization and you were even asking the question, are we greenwashing? You're probably not, because you're being conscious and you're considering it. So I think if you have made meaningful steps to do it, use some of those marketing dollars, use your brand as a platform to start communicating about the issues that matter to your business, to the bottom line. And I think, yeah, there's lots of different ways you need to consider it. You need to talk about the issues that are most relevant for you. If you're a food business, you need to be talking about food waste, plastic, things like that. You need, if you're, I don't know, in another industry, talk about the things that are relevant to your product and the ways in which you and your customers can work together to lower your impact. But I think if you're not communicating about climate change, you're missing both an opportunity and you're not taking up your responsibility as a responsible brand. So yeah, I think there are loads of exciting ways you can do that. There are things you need to watch out for, but beyond all, you just need to be authentic and go on that journey with your customers. Be humble about it. You know, like with Lucy's organization, Humblebrag, you know, it starts with a bit of humility. But yeah, does that answer your question, Maria, or have I just talked crap?
No, it does. Yeah, no, thank you so much. And it's so important. I think to probably preempt everything that we're talking about here today, that I think one of the key principles of effective climate communication is that communication shouldn't be the starting point, action should be. And I think that's such an important thread throughout probably everything we'll talk about. And I think with that, last but certainly not least, I'd love to introduce Merick from Holie, whose feeling of helplessness in tackling climate change, which I think all of us have felt at some point, it actually led him to found his own Amsterdam-based company, Holie, which serves delicious breakfast foods along with other foods, whilst also helping regreen and cool down the planet. So I think in talking about action, Merick is probably one of the great ones to talk about, kind of a company that's built specifically with positive change ingrained in everything that you do. And so as you introduce yourself, Merick, I'd love for you to talk about how, you know, small companies can also make a big difference, and how you can leverage your relationships with bigger players to amplify your impact. You know, it's one thing to do kind of a massive campaign about this and really raise awareness in a big way, but I think it'd also be great to hear kind of on an everyday basis how small companies can also make a huge impact.
Thanks, Maria, for the introduction, and thanks for having me. And I see a lot of similarities in all the profiles here in this call today. Everybody got up to a point when the frustration got too much, you know, and people decided that really that they wanted to use their talent as a force for good. For me, that was back in 2018. That's when we founded Holie, and it was in fact driven by the fact that I felt really hopeless and helpless when it comes to climate change. And I really wanted to become part of the solution. And that's why we founded Holie. We really try to use our business as a force for good. And our mission is to regreen and cool down the planet. And we do this by creating healthy and sustainable breakfast cereals, but also we decided to place impact really at the center of our business. We use 50% of our profit to restore nature in the Netherlands and in Africa, which is a great solution to climate change. This year, we are already on track to regreen an area the size of Amsterdam Center, which will take out, and I don't know if it says anything, but 7.5 million kilograms of CO2 out of the air. So to get back to your question, I think that even though we are a young and growing company, our impact is already pretty significant. And I think that's mainly because of two reasons. We chose to place impact really at the center of our business. But also our consumers and our retail partners really like that we communicate in a positive and solution driven manner. And I think that's part of the success, and I think that's pretty distinctive. And I think that's what people need, you know, like solutions. And really, I think that people are looking for tools to make positive impact, but they just don't know where to start. So yeah, that's kind of my background.
Thank you so much, Merick. And I think with that, I'd love to open up a more kind of dynamic forum of discussion. And I think, Merick, the last point that you touched on is a great one to probably spark that discussion of, you know, there's lots of different tactics to communicate about the need for climate action. There's the kind of creating the sense of urgency and explaining what climate change is and the issues around it. And its impacts. But then there's also kind of the other side, which is focusing on solutions and getting people excited about what we could do together. What do each of you think is necessary at this state? You know, Bert also was touching on, you know, the fact that, you know, it's important to kind of open up the solutions that one business is doing so other businesses can replicate. I'd love to hear a bit about your perspective on the tone of climate communications.
I can quickly respond to that, which is to say that, you know, part of the reason that we started Creators for Climate 2.5 years ago, was because there was this disconnect between the urgency of the climate emergency and business as usual, especially within the creative industries. And I think that's changed. A lot of the players that were not, you know, didn't have the climate on their agenda are suddenly signing up to be B Corps. So for us, we've had to pivot and say, we saw our role as really sitting outside society and really amplifying the voices of civil society and activists. But now everyone's going, how do we achieve these goals? So actually partnering with business. And I was reading a report from Edelman post-COVID, which is that my CEO is ranked as the most trusted person or figure, like people's own employer post-COVID. So we already know that business obviously can be a force for good and is hugely powerful, but now even more so. So yeah, that's my perspective on that.
I'm a little bit more afraid that in our area, the fashion industry, big companies see customers asking for more awareness and more openness and more reasonability, but I have the feeling that some of them take it wrongly and start talking about sustainability and recycling and things like that without really, first of all, meaning it, and secondly, without doing it. They're only communicating about it, and that's a worrying thing for me, because it gives consumers a false truth. So I'm a bit worried. And in our industry, we see really the big ones, the big players, knowing all of them that they have to do something. They have to talk about sustainability. They have to talk about recycling. They have to talk about taking things back. But that's where it ends. So I'm a little bit worried here. Maybe that's not the right tone of voice today, but it's what I'm seeing. Yeah. Anybody else comments on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was quite funny in the kind of pre-meeting for this panel. I was talking to the guys about this, and I kind of think I hear you, Bert, and I've always sort of imagined businesses that start talking about these net zero commitments and sustainability before action. For me, it kind of reminds me of a drunk person standing on a bar and telling everyone that they're going to go sober. You know, everyone's just like, you're still drunk on fossil fuels. You've got no chance of going sober. There's no authenticity there. So I do think it needs to start with that action before you can kind of authentically start communicating with your customers. But, you know, I think when that communication starts, when you have the courage and you've got the kind of authenticity and action to back that up, I think that's when it can get really exciting. And I think for me, I think my advice in that front would be, I think too often when we start communicating to customers and encouraging them to change, we sometimes rely on altruism too much. We rely on take action because it's the right thing to do. I think where communications is going now is actually tapping into the deeper kind of like drivers of communication change, be it a sense of kind of betterment of your life, a sense of justice or fairness, tapping into those deeper drivers of behavior change with your climate change communications, I think for me makes it that much more compelling. So, you know, we launched a campaign recently for the Zero Carbon campaign, and that was all about a sense of injustice and fairness. So the whole campaign platform was about if you pollute, you pay. This idea that we're all doing our bit, but if you are polluting, you should pay a fair price on carbon. And that was all about lobbying the government to try and introduce a price on carbon, a carbon tax. So I think it's about looking at those deeper triggers that we use in advertising all of the time and trying to apply those to climate change messaging to drive action.
Tom, do you think we might be entering a post-advertising era where actually just creating the positive impact is your marketing strategy?
Honestly, I think that's the way it's going. I've never looked at it like that, Lucy, but I agree. I think it needs to be led by action, and the conversation then happens around that action in an authentic way. And I think if you're not creating the action, they're just not going to be relevant. in a few years' time. So no, I think that what an exciting time to be involved in that space, right? So,
but Tom, I think that is also what is worrying Bert, is that companies are allowed to use sustainability, not the way it's supposed to be, like that it's truly about positive impact and positive action, but they kind of use it as a marketing tool to promote products and mislead consumers into the right direction, into the wrong direction. And I think, and I took the example of Shell last time as well Shell is top 10 polluter in the world, but I think 90% of their communication is about sustainability, whilst they don't even have a specific sustainability target for 2030. So, as long as that is allowed, I kind of share the opinion of Bert that it worries me,
And there's this other thing, when you talk about jeans, I would love to talk about the softness of the material, the fit, the color, all those kind of things. And we're sort of pushed into this corner saying, oh, we have to talk first about organic cotton recycling, about showing the people that work in the factory that they're well treated, and about their salaries and all that thing. And I actually want to talk about, I want you to be content with the jeans I sent to you, and I want to hear you say, wow, the fit is fantastic and I love them, and I'm going to tell everybody to wear these jeans because they're so good. And that's this, we are in this struggle, and maybe you understand, Tom, maybe you can help us. It's a real struggle to move from saying how good you do things, and I just want people to read our sustainability report, but that's impossible. It's like a 78-page thing with a lot of information, which I love, and maybe you guys also do, but 99% of the people just want to have a nice pair of jeans, and they want to be sure that it's well made and that they can send it back after use. So we're very much struggling into this. And what kind of pictures do you make? What kind of photography do you use? How we can not only take slim 25-year-old blonde Dutch girls, because that's not what we want. But that does look nice. You know what I mean? So we are also in this struggle. It's hard. I really have a hard time trying to find the right ways. And then there's also this Facebook campaigns and things. I myself, as a person, don't want to be hit on my screen by flashes of things that I don't want to see. But as a company, we're nearly pushed into this direction also, because otherwise I don't reach you guys. And all my competitors are doing it. So I can also say I just stop all the campaigns and I've tried to find you another way. But it's hard. It's hard. But please help. Anybody out there?
But I think that's also an interesting segue into that tension between how companies have traditionally communicated about what they do and why they exist and what they make, but also kind of this need to communicate about the positive impact that they're creating in the world. And then you have iconic examples of campaigns like Patagonia's "Don't Buy This Jacket," where you're, head on tackling kind of this tension between growth and, if we're serious about reducing our emissions and our footprint, actually, should we be selling products at all? And I think there's some companies, like Too Good To Go, for example, where like, hopefully at the end of the day, food waste won't be a problem and Too Good To Go will go out of business. But until then, there's a lot of communications that needs to be done. But yeah, I'd love to hear your perspective of how companies should grapple with this inherent tension of kind of selling their products or marketing their businesses versus.
I think what Bert said was super fascinating in terms of, well, first of all, I can relate because I would rather spend my life doing something other than worrying about the climate. So I get that you want to talk about how great your product is, but you have to talk about how sustainable it is, because that's the USP. But also you touched on the fact that to exist as a company, you essentially have to become an aggressive marketeer, which I think is interesting because you've got a lot of social impact makers now forced to spend so much time online. We're also like being drawn away from, in a way, collaborative action. So yeah, I just wanted to jump on that.
To answer your question, Maria, I think in a way, like, you mean the paradox between growing and that you also have a negative impact with a product. I think that in general, the future is for companies that sell a product that is truly sustainable, which means by theory, it can be produced forever, you know, without using the resources exactly. But on the other hand, I think businesses should use their marketing budget as a force for good as well. You know, try not to sell your product, but sell inspiration, sell awareness around climate change. You know, so I truly hope that at some point we'll stop promoting products, but we'll start, you know, really creating awareness. You know, start fundraisers as a company for the planet. You can do so many things that are also good for your brand, and that are not necessarily focused on selling more products as well. So I think that is sort of the future.
There's one thing that I can add to that as well. For us, it's Too Good To Go. You know, ultimately, our goal is that all food produced is also food consumed. So ultimately, like you said, Maria, is that we would have a world where Too Good To Go is not needed anymore. Unfortunately, that's very idealistic because there will always be a certain amount of food surplus, which we want to make sure that doesn't go to waste. But for us, what we really see is the key, and I think also kind of touching upon what was said earlier in terms of communications, is that we as a business, the way we really want to drive also in terms of communications and creating this bigger impact is reinvesting the revenue we get from our food application. So we get it through our business, etc., through our marketplace. We reinvest it into creating bigger campaigns and creating even bigger impact. And that is really what amplifies our growth and really makes us expand even more, because we as Too Good To Go, we see it in our duty to also be one of those change makers within the food system, because it still is not talked about enough. People are not connecting the dots. Scientists have been trying to talk about climate change for years. It has never worked. So it is really also in the duty of businesses to make it as easy as possible for people to actually grasp, you know, how urgent the matter is and how easy it is actually to take action as well. So that's for us as Too Good To Go. That's what we inherently also see in ourselves. And that's why I say inspire and empower. The inspiration part needs to happen and empowerment also needs to happen. We can't leave them in isolation. You have to see that both two-folded aspects.
One of the key things that I think communicators can do, and especially the advertising industry, is that we're the myth builders of society, right? So we need new narratives. And I think that we live in a capitalist system, so it's really difficult to talk about degrowth. Even though some brands are starting to do it, which is really incredible. So I would argue that our role is to really, like, it's so important right now to give a vision of hope, especially for young people. So if we can paint an alternative vision of the future, I think that that's one of the most powerful things that we can do, is actually point to a direction.
Just as a kind of thought, and this is kind of going a bit back to Bert's comment and Merick's comment as well. I go a bit back and forth on this idea of obviously the need to kind of like market sustainability as the only kind of offering in your product. And I think there are both pros and cons. So I think it's wonderful to have a kind of niche as a brand and to be talking to people about sustainability. But I think also it's important to bear in mind that as a brand, you often offer a utility to your customer, whether that is clothing or food or sustenance or stuff like that. I think there's a limited market that will buy your product because it's sustainable. But most research shows that people buy your product because it looks good or it's comfy or it says something about them. So I often find that sustainability or a sustainable kind of selling point is the reason why they will become a lifelong fan and help you communicate your product for you. But I think if you want to break outside of that green bubble into a bigger mass market and therefore have more impact, it is important to sell the utility and then bring in the impact, the sustainability as a supporting message as well. Would be my personal kind of take on it, but does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I really like that you say that, because it's also a big part of the communication issue. Because why do people buy your product? Not mainly because it's sustainable. And I think that's also because climate change is for a lot of people still a very abstract and distant problem. And I think that is one of the major issues that we have right now, because we know the issue of climate change and we also know the solutions. The only problem is how to get people moving. And I think part of the issue is that we communicate it in the wrong way, in a way that it's either too hopeless, You know, if you hear like trillions tons of ice melting, it kind of feels like, okay, get away, you know. And on the other hand, terms like net zero, CO2, methane, decarbonization are also really hard to understand. So, and of course, I totally agree that we should also talk about product utilities. But I think the bigger question is, how can we communicate climate change in a way that people actually feel it, and that they are willing to change, and that they are choosing a product because it's sustainable, and for the second reason, because it has no sugar, you know, for example.
I love that analogy. Well, I think in talking about kind of those very specific terms around climate change, there's also been a question in the chat about communicating carbon neutrality, for example, and you know what it means for a company to be kind of offsetting their emissions or becoming neutral while still kind of being in operations. Like, what does the emergence of this concept teach us or challenge us, like when we're trying to talk about a topic like that? Or Merick, to your point, should communications not be focused on that concept, and should it be instead kind of trying to bring climate action closer to home?
Yeah, well, we avoid CO2 and carbon in our packaging communications. We communicate how many square meters people re-green when they buy a pack of Holie. We decided that felt more like something people could understand. We talk about re-greening and cooling down the planet. So I'm not saying that is a solution, but we do try to communicate climate change in a more commercial way, like that people can really feel it. But yeah, it's carbon neutrality. It doesn't get to me. You know, it feels really far away.
I read an interesting article about the ivory tower of sustainability language. And when I was working for a multi-stakeholder initiative, there were so many imposters in the room, and nobody was having a proper conversation because everybody was scared of using simple language. So I can definitely attest to the fact that I believe that a lot of this language is used to keep these concepts obscure, but also a lot of us are paid a lot of money to be translators, and we can prove how smart we are because we're familiar with the language. So I think that, you know, we'd be doing consumers a huge, or citizens, a huge justice if we're able to use more, honest and transparent language.
Couldn't agree more. Like, the amount of times I hear the term net zero banded around, not even carbon, just net zero. Like, if you think about that from just an abstract perspective, net zero, you are more likely going to think about someone who isn't using nets, it's like a fishing initiative or something like that, than you would link it to carbon, right? So there are, completely to Lucy's point, there are so many layers of abstraction built onto carbon neutrality. You have to have almost a degree or be incredibly well written it to really grasp what carbon neutral or net zero carbon means, which is even one more layer of complexity beyond that. So yeah, as a terminology, I think it restricts our audience just in kind of using it.
How about carbon positive? We are carbon positive. I think that's understandable, isn't it?
Yeah, in a way, but it still feels kind of far away, like carbon positive. Like back in the day, there was the major climate issue with the ozone layer, which still a lot of people confuse with climate change, by the way. But people could imagine like there's a hole in a layer. Like it was something that people could imagine, and everybody understood it. And everybody was like, okay, we need to fix that hole now, you know? So I would suggest like come up with some sort of same narrative, like talking about a big blanket that is around the earth, like overheating our home, and we need to get rid of the blanket by stop. I don't know, but it is difficult.
Yeah, maybe we have to make it more easier for people to grab and find a way to make it more visible. And maybe, you know, they're looking for words, climate crisis or climate urgency or climate whatever, but still it doesn't seem to get to people or something. I don't know. Strange.
I guess the question is whether they're looking for words or looking for actions, I guess, that they could kind of hook onto. But I think on this topic, it's so fascinating. I'd love to hear, maybe we do a quick round of everybody of, you know, we don't have to name names, but maybe like the most ridiculous thing that you've ever seen from a climate communication standpoint and the best example that you've ever seen. Not to put you on the spot, sorry, I'm improvising, but I think just hearing all of you talk about these different topics, I'd love to hear the different perspectives.
We try to work with specialists because, of course, we are not specialists. We know something about it. But that's why we've now teamed up with Just Dig It, and they're helping us also to get the right language. And they're really doing something, and really simple things. I mean, everybody understands what they're doing. They're digging holes, and things start growing again in Africa, and that's fantastic. It's as simple as that, and I like that a lot. So yeah, I team up with people that do know what to say and how to say and what to do. I don't know how you feel about the others, but
I'm a big fan of consultants, Bert. I think that fashion is an industry where we've seen a lot of bad attempts at communicating sustainability. I mean, H&M's, greenwash collection. No, I don't think it's called that. Green collection. Conscious collection. I think anything with conscious in it is incredibly frustrating, putting the onus of responsibility back on the consumer, whilst obviously you're a major brand burning, piles of your stock.
I'm meeting people every day that mentioning H&M like being with their conscious collection is fantastic, They do 0.5% of their turnover in conscious.
Well, I live in an echo chamber of really progressive people, so that's good. It's good to read these reports to remember actually what's cutting through. But yeah, one of the brands that I think is doing really well is Vivo Barefoot, and they're trying to, or have claimed, regeneration. That's like the new word. Yeah. But it's interesting because I feel like they're also challenging this model of growth where they may not produce a shoe if it won't be seen to regenerate the landscape that it's in. So it is, I think, inherently difficult to truly be regenerative, but those are maybe two extreme examples in the fashion industry.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to jump in? Yeah, Tom, see your mic's off. Putting you on the spot.
I mean, it's easy to point fingers. I mean, God, Shell just kept on targeting me on LinkedIn with loads of ads about net zero, and I was like, guys, the algorithms are not working here. I'm not your audience. I mean, there are so many people who are doing it wrong, but I think I guess broadly, I think sometimes what I like to see is sometimes brands don't need to try and tackle climate change in its entirety. A lot of people feel that when they start talking about climate change, well, where do you start? Well, you start by explaining it to customers or explaining carbon emissions. Well, that's just a science lesson. In some respects, I think where the interest is for your customers is in what we sometimes call like atomic stories, like really tiny examples that are kind of explosive in terms of imagination, which demonstrate the impact of what low carbon living means, or demonstrate what the future might look like. So sometimes, so with Bert, there might be some amazing story about indigo. I mean, that sparked something in my imagination. I was like, wow, I didn't really think about indigo as a dye, but like actually you can tell the story of sustainability through really specific examples which ignite our imagination. Because I think the way in which we form our worldview isn't just some one amazing mural of what a sustainable world looks like. It's through creating almost like a patchwork or a tapestry of tiny little stories which build up our worldview. So I would not try and tackle the big thing, but look at all of the tiny examples that are really specific to your brand or your product, and then tell the climate story through those examples to make them feel more relevant, would be my advice.
Indigo is even another story. It is interesting because indigo was one of the most, or is still one of the most cancerized dyes there is, but there's now the cradle-to-cradle version of that. Actually, I got onto it by William McDonough, who told me, Bert, I love your idea. I love your leasing jeans. I wrote about it 30 years ago. You're a hero. And then he said, but you're recycling toxic material. That's not very interesting. So stop using this indigo. And he was right. So that's beautiful. And we get lots of, that's nice of being at the forefront. You get lots of comments and things and people advising you saying, hey, you're doing this, but you can do really better. And I like that a lot about it. In these 10 years, I've learned more than ever. And this was one of the lessons, recycling toxic materials, of course, totally ridiculous. And I'm very happy with it. So the journey of learning about sustainability is something that I love and I'd like to talk about and and that I like to give on to other people starting in the textile industry. Lots of people want to do something, but they have no clue how and where and when. So yeah, that's why we do a webinar every month with students. That's also a good form of creating your ambassadors for your brand. So that does work. You're right about that. That does work. And word of mouth also, still the old-fashioned word of mouth is one of our best things we have, I think.
Yeah,
So
and I
that's
think, I mean, storytelling inherently is one of the most powerful tools in creating change. And I love the concept of atomic stories, especially when you're talking about something as big as climate change. And I think that's also why I'm such a huge fan of when it comes to kind of inspiring action, the campaign that Philippe was talking about of look, smell, taste, don't waste. Because I think instead of saying like, hey, tackle this massive problem of food waste across the world, it's like, hey, here's this one simple action that you can take when you open your fridge. But yeah, Philippe, I'd love to hear kind of from your perspective, just how the process it goes at Too Good To Go and kind of getting to campaigns like that and the importance of it.
Yeah, so I'm just listening in, like it's so interesting what you guys are saying, so I don't want to jump in, but it's like for us, the way we go about it with Too Good To Go is that food waste is such a massive issue. You can tackle it left and right. You could look at all segments of society. So ultimately, you have to break it down as much as possible. And this is where we thought about, when it came to this campaign is, when you're looking at the supply chain where most amount of food is being wasted, most of it is wasted towards consumers, then asking the question, okay, why is it wasted? Well, it's because the vast majority of it is being wasted because of the misinterpretation and misunderstanding of date labels. And then we thought about, okay, so what can we as Too Good To Go, we as a brand are able to communicate to consumers to actually do this change. And this is ultimately where we started partnering with big players such as Danone, Unilever. A lot of people could question us, yeah, but you're kind of also partnering with the devil, that are also not doing the right thing. But at the same time, you should also accompany them and also kind of guide them towards the right decisions at the same time and kind of bring them onto the table, onto the discussion to actually bring this change about as well. And I think this is really what we as Too Good To Go really try to do as much as possible to really include everybody in the discussion and to ultimately use our power in communications. Our marketing is huge and also our expertise in that as well, in that sort of sense. But really making sure that we use our partners, we use politicians to actually drive this change forward. And with the date labeling specifically, we were able to see some fascinating results with the different campaigns that we have launched over 9 countries now. We're in 15 countries worldwide, but now in 9 countries, we have done this campaign where we can actually see that people have started changing their behaviors as well because of a certain label that was on packages and because of campaigns that we have launched. And ultimately, that's where we want to go to, rather than just doing everything at the same time and trying to go for the big boat straight away. Let's try to break it down and make it as tangible and actionable as possible for people, because otherwise they're going to be overwhelmed. It's going to be like Merick says, or I can't remember who said it, but it's too distant, it's too abstract. And ultimately, that's the last thing we want people to think about.
Lucy, did you want to jump in?
No. I just think that we all recognize that like governments are in crisis. So I when conversations go big like this, I always think, well, what more needs to be done? And so, we here at B Corp, obviously, business is a force for good and talking about corporate social responsibility. And I really think that the future will be industry collaboration and brand collaboration, which is inherently very difficult in the landscape that we live in. And I think that civil society, we're seeing climate activists being successful in suing for industries. And I think that will continue to go forward. So I think I am very much in my practice about painting a vision of the future and hope and inspiration, but I very much champion the role of civil society in moving us fast enough forward. And so, yeah, I just want to propose that industry leaders start to think about how willing they are to collaborate and what that might look like going forward. Because if business is the most powerful entity in society right now, it's so much more than communicating your brand story.
Thank you. No, and I think one of the, I'm just conscious of time, so I'll probably get to the last question now, but one of the key things that we're championing with the B Corp movement is also this idea of, yeah, transforming the way that we do business, and all banding together and going beyond kind of an individual company transformation to how do we change sectors, how do we change industries. And I think everybody in the room today kind of is inherently amazingly working at companies that are creating incredible change in the world, and many of which have been founded with the idea of kind of tackling some of these massive problems. But so many so many companies out in the world kind of aren't, they've started in a traditional form of the way that they run their business, and now have recognized that, actually we're in the middle of a climate crisis and societal crisis and all sorts of other issues. And so they're deciding to change their ways. So there was a great question here of kind of, how does a company that's kind of on that journey communicate the fact that they recognize they're part of the problem, and they recognize that they need to do more and they need to improve without, we live in a cancel culture and a culture where, we've talked so much about greenwashing even in this conversation. So yeah, I'd love to hear your perspectives and advice on companies kind of working on their journey.
Well, yeah, to be honest, like a lot of big old-fashioned companies are totally stuck in the profit at all cost model. They are shareholder driven, and at the end of the day, when they have to choose between people, planet, and profit, they will always choose profit. Like I think that's part of the problem, and I think my advice to those companies would be more like a warning. Like I truly believe, if you would zoom out a couple of 100 years, that we are living in a time where things changed, and I think change is hard, but it's happening relatively fast now. So my advice would be more like a warning. Like I would speed up your transforming process to a more sustainability company, because otherwise you will lose your relevance within, I think, faster than you think. So yeah.
I think my advice would be, everybody you speak to wants to do something in sustainability. Nobody is against it. Nobody is against giving their jeans back and hearing that it will be recycled and reused. But mostly they're stuck into this system. And when you have, for us, it's easy. We started this company with this idea and we're doing it. So that's simple. But if you're into this old-fashioned way of trying to make, like you say, Merick, a lot of profit and also a lot of costs. If I bring it back to, if I relate it to the fashion industry, where you have designers traveling the world, they have to find the new things, they have to be fast, it has to all be, and that's very expensive. Make samples, make collections, pushing this forward. If you have all these costs, is the only thing they can do in the end is what they think they can do is make the buying price as cheap as possible. If you do that, you will end up buying in the slutters of Bangladesh, and you can never do something better. So you have to start somewhere. And I always say, try to sell it internally in your company. Try to be honest and try to say, okay, guys, we cannot change from one day to the other, but let's make targets for ourselves. And let's start somewhere, and let's try to see it as fun. Let's try to be proud of ourselves if we succeed in the first tiniest thing we're doing, and then step onwards from that. And that I think that does work in the company. And then of course the B Corp audit or the B Corp ley line is a very interesting thing to follow. Even if you cannot be a B Corp tomorrow, you can always take the framework and say, okay, I'll go through it. I learned a lot from it myself, and a lot of questions were going, okay, never thought of this, but interesting. So if you take that as a ley line and you follow the rhythm and you keep pushing internally in your company, then why not? One day you'll become a B Corp and start using your business as a force for good.
What I can say as well, I completely echo what Bert just said as well. I think change management is often something seen as something very threatening by businesses, and it has to happen overnight. And it's going to take a lot of investment, and it's going to take a 360-degree kind of change. But ultimately, I think what is important to understand is really this step-by-step kind of targets. Rather than setting net zero targets by 2030, think about what can I do next year? What can I do the year after? And I agreed, like the way we use it at Too Good To Go as well, since we have become B Corp, we use the framework as well to give us as a guideline to see, okay, what can we do next year? How can we become better and better? Because even as a business for ourselves, we are far from perfect. We have big servers that are running our application, etc. So of course, we also have a carbon footprint. So how can we, for example, in the future become more sustainable and do our part as well in that sort of scenario? So it's about really including it in your culture and also in your journey towards becoming more sustainable going forward. And that is a really step-by-step journey.
Yeah, and get the people in your company enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, proud.
So they feel involved. That's important.
I'll jump in. Thanks. I think for me, it comes. I think for me, it comes down to two things: humility and humor. I think if you're not near the end goal, you've got to go in with humility. You can't position yourself as the hero or the winner or the champion as a company. Otherwise, it's just going to look arrogant and stupid. So I think humility is incredibly important. Yeah. I also think humor is really important as well. And it's something that I personally believe in. I think there is a tendency in our space to get a bit serious a bit too quickly. And like we all know, anyone on this call knows it's a bloody crisis and we need to act fast. But at the same time, you're a brand talking to your customers. You don't want to scare them shitless and panic, even though deep down, you know, God, we need to move quickly. So I sometimes find humor, if used well, can be incredibly important. I see, you can think of laughter like a ladder to overcome kind of behavioral barriers, because it can kind of, it opens people up. People don't like to be told they're wrong, but if you can make light of it, it can really open up a conversation. And we just launched an animation for Innocent Drinks about their sustainability commitments. And that was full of humor and humility to try and talk to their customers about these issues and to explain what they're doing in a way that wasn't arrogant. And, you know, I just think this space needs more laughter in some respects, given how scary things are. And that isn't to make light of the issues, it's just to open people up to change, if that makes sense.
If we are going down, then let's at least have some fun along the way.
Not kind of.
Hear the violence.
Okay, Tom, I totally agree. We need to talk, Tom. I like that.
So answering your question, I think transparency, we could all agree with that. So if you have dirty laundry, air it first before somebody airs it on your behalf. Obviously, then you're obliged to create a roadmap and work towards it. I'm seeing in the chat a lot of people talking about coming up against power, which, you know, actually does come down to individuals, so shareholders or people on the board. And I would say that, you know, we need to stop celebrating extreme wealth. That is not a good or cool thing to have. And actually, there's a lot of really unhappy people in this system. And that's what I find really empowering, is that it's not like capitalism exists out there and we're like, we should no longer have any money. That's going to make us really happy. There's, you know, we do get more connected to ourselves and what matters by reconsidering our values, which I think is, you know, we're all really values driven. That's why we work in this space. I also think that, you know, we need to stay a little bit fearful, because otherwise we're just not good. It's so hard to change human behavior anyway. So it's good to kind of tap into that sometimes. And I would encourage employees and young people and diverse people to be brave and to say what you think, because often people will sit at the table and they'll say, okay, everybody agrees with me. So be courageous as change makers within your company. Yeah.
That is the most cohesive lessons I've ever heard somebody kind of spout at 2 a.m. Thank you so much, Lucy, and everybody else. I'm conscious of we're running out, well, we're over time already. And I will try to coerce this group of people to do a round 2 in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, thank you so much to everybody who's joined, to all of the conversations that are happening in the chat. To all of the lessons that were discussed today. And I think, Philippe, you talked about something that's really important, and I think I'd love to leave it as a thought for everybody in talking about communications. And it's this idea that, you know, you said even too good to go, a company that's built in tackling an issue is far from perfect. And I think when we're in this space, we need to all remind ourselves that yeah, perfection's the enemy of progress, and we're all working towards being better. And I think communications is a powerful tool in doing that, and inspiring others to kind of join us. So I hope there'll be failures in this space for sure. But I hope more and more people continue using their voices and their platforms to create change. Any parting words before, we tune out? Thank you to everybody. And I hope you enjoy the rest of our summit. We have a really exciting session on collective action coming up as well. And full programming. But yeah, thank you especially to our speakers who have joined today.